Linda, will the event be recorded?
Yes, Karen, thank you for the question. We will be recording the panelist discussion, and it will be available on the SIG's website.
Okay, great.
I wish we had a little film clip we could play of the wonderful treat that we have, this movie that we'll be giving everyone. So alas, next time we'll make sure we have that well in advance. But welcome everyone. For those who are just joining, you are right on. This is the ANHW event, Reimagining Gender Norms in Science. We'll be getting underway in just a moment. I am going to give everyone just a minute or two more to join us. I appreciate you being on time. We have a tremendous set of speakers for you today. It's really going to be exciting. I can't wait. I've been looking forward to it all day long. And so we'll be getting underway in just a moment. So I'm only going to give the group one more minute before we get underway, but I do want to again welcome everyone. This is the ANHW's event, Reimagining Gender Roles in Science. So we'll get underway in just a moment. For those of you who are joining, I would ask you to please place your audio on mute for the moment as we get underway. That'll at least help other people listen and be able to hear without interruption. So I greatly appreciate you doing that. So nice to see all of you, even in thumbnail size. All right, my friends. I'm going to get us underway because I want to honor all of those who joined us right on time. Welcome everyone to the ANHW event, Reimagining Gender Norms in Science. My name is Linda Rossetti. I serve on the board of the ANHW along with a number of outstanding women, and we as a group are thrilled to be able to bring you this event today. Let me start off by just giving you some logistics so we can level set on where we're headed today. As I said, the program Reimagining Gender Norms in Science is part of a speaker series that the ANHW is hosting this year in 2021. The series is all about reimagining equity and trying to connect into the conversations on transition that are reshaping our world. Today's event on science, we're thrilled to bring you. For your calendars in June 5th, we will be bringing you Reimagining Inclusion with a special focus on the workplace. We hope that you can join us for that. And as always, our events are recorded. And for those of you who have friends or others who weren't able to join today, we hope that they choose to listen to the taped version of the event on the website. Again, logistics, we're supposed to run about an hour and a half. The initial portion of this is a 45-minute panel discussion, which will start in just a moment. Following that, we're going to break out into breakout rooms. 3 members of the ANHW will join the panelists and host 3 different breakout rooms. This will give you an opportunity to have a more intimate conversation, ask the panelists questions, and frankly, talk to your colleagues about whatever is on your mind following this discussion. So we hope you stay tuned for that part of the event. I do want to again say thank you to all of my colleagues, particularly my co-host, my co-chair, I should say, Dr. Kirthana Sharma. She's here with us today. It's a pleasure to be on the ANHW with all these outstanding women. We also today want to welcome our chapters from around the globe. We're honored to have people, members, thousands of members across the globe who are involved in the Alumni Network of Harvard Women. It's a great pleasure to be with everyone today. We also have 2 sponsoring organizations within the university. And excuse me while I read so I get it right. Joining us today are the Harvard Alumni in Healthcare. We welcome them and all their members, and the Harvard Women in Defense, Diplomacy, and Development, the infamous 3D. We're welcoming all of them today. So thrilled that you're here. As a special thank you to all of our attendees, I want to let you know that immediately following this event, you will receive an email from Eventbrite, and it will have a special link for you to view a movie, a documentary film, which is entitled Picture a Scientist. And it's a film chronicling the pathways of some groundbreaking women in the sciences. And I think that it's an outstanding film. That link will be active for 72 hours for all the people who registered for this event. And it's really our thank you to you for joining us today. And not only do we hope you enjoy this conversation, we hope you really enjoy the film. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers. And I know that you've all taken a moment, to read their bios online. So I'm going to do just a teeny bit to remind you who these fabulous women are. I'm going to start by welcoming Deb Hicks. Deb, that many of you may know, served as the Senior Vice President, Chief People and Culture Office at the world-renowned Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Deb also served as Associate Dean and Head of HR at the Harvard Medical School. Prior to that, she was Head of HR at Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. She is really renowned all over New England and has most recently served on Governor Charlie Baker's transition team. Currently serves as an advisor and coach. And Deb, we are thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
We also have Dr. Jeanette Mladenovic. And Dr. Jeanette is an extraordinarily gifted woman who currently serves as the president of the Foundation for the Advancement of International Medical Education and Research. Prior to this, she served as EVP and provost of the Oregon Health Sciences University, where she brought extraordinarily new thinking to many elements of the university, including starting a school of public health and initiating relationships in Southeast Asia for the university. So Dr. Jenny, we're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you, wonderful to be here.
And certainly not least, last but not least, Dr. Gisela Storz. And Dr. Storz, we're so thrilled to have you with us. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Storz is a National Institutes of Health distinguished investigator and a leader of the Division of the Molecular and Cellular Biology at the NIH. Among a number of awards, Dr. Storz was named in 2012 to the National Academy of Sciences. She is a leading thinker in a wide variety of topics in the field of molecular biology, including having spearheaded groundbreaking research in sensing of oxidative stress, roles of regulatory RNA, and small proteins in bacteria. And Dr. Storz, we're so thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So ladies, I would wonder if we could just start out with a little bit of a discussion about the landscape, right? And what I'd love you to talk about at first is really maybe help for our audience learn how you would think about gender equity today in the sciences. How would you describe it today? And why don't we ask Dr. Jenny to give us a start on this one?
Sure, thank you for that question. So I would start by saying that it's actually better than 50 years ago when I started, but it is not anywhere close to where it needs to be. And I think given the COVID pandemic, we may very well see some slippage in a number of areas, although I would have to be remorse if I didn't admit that in many institutions, women have taken significant leadership during COVID. Yet the real issue is that we don't sit at the leadership table, so that we still suffer inequities in opportunities, pay, and the culture remains incredibly hierarchical with different rules for different folk. So I think without significant intervention, we are still going to be here for too long and not be able to utilize all the talent we have. So I speak from the look of academic medicine, which again is a bit different from universities. And about 50% of the NIH funding goes to schools of medicine. And they actually are different from universities because there is so much money in schools of medicine and they encompass a health system. So it's a very different model than straight university.
Well, Dr. Jenny, thank you for mentioning that. And I think we'll go next to Deb Hicks, who spent a bit of time at an academic medical center we might all be familiar with. So, Deb, I wonder how you would, characterize the current state.
Well, I would, I just mirror and echo everything that was just said. I also think there's a very interesting changing of tides. So when you look at even, this would be more for your June 5th presentation on inclusion, but you go back to David Thomas, who's done a ton of research on when you go after the numbers, you can get the numbers up. But guess what? If nothing changes in the system, and, I feel like, and I'm not a scientist, so I could really be an observer coming in there. And I also acknowledge that HR is not always beloved, but I think I found my way to successfully be there. But I would say that on the surface, when you look sometimes, well, the numbers all look right. The faces look like there are enough women. So, and here's what I think the shifting tide is. I do agree, anybody who's looked at the recent McKinsey report, it wasn't like we were doing great before COVID. The numbers from 2015 to 2020, some improvements, but not, and I'm talking even beyond science, but the cultures, which was, Jeanette, you just mentioned that a little bit about, it's built on a male model, it's built on a hierarchical model. And, as an outside observer, part of me wants to look and say, shouldn't we be applying science here? Look at the data, look at the outcomes. And when women are involved, there's better, in some ways, we're not even doing what we should be doing around that. But the changing tide is also on the scary side, what happened in COVID. And even though I think people's lives were exposed during COVID, like I'm mentoring this woman, she's Latina, she's got 3 kids under the age of 3. She had 2 of her babies in Tupperware holders while she was having a meeting. And these women, some are dropping out of the workforce. So that's a big concern in science and outside of science. But here's the hopeful side of me in that I have also engaged with a lot of the up and coming women who, quite frankly, and I hope this is just me saying, because I didn't live in science, but I lived in the male worlds elsewhere where, I wasn't equal, my voice wasn't heard. And I think the women coming up are not tolerating. But here's the other scary part. When we look at academic institutions that were the brains and the science and the research, some of these women are opting out to go to pharma or go to smaller organizations where they don't have to fight the political barriers that they have to fight inside. So I think it's a very optimistic time if we engage with it, and the outside world demands it of academia.
So much in that. So I want to get Dr. Storz in this, and then we'll come back to some of these comments because there's a lot here. And but Dr. Storz, let you get in on this. The current state. How would you describe gender equity in the sciences today?
So I'm still a practicing scientist. What has struck me is that even when I was in graduate school, which was 84 to 88, the class was 50% women. And that's been the case for the last 40 years. But what I have found disheartening is that the numbers haven't changed. So in terms of PIs or principal investigators, they're in the ballpark of 30%. There's just a significant drop off. And so I've wrestled a lot with why is there this drop off? I feel very privileged to have my position. I enjoy doing science, but I understand how sometimes it's very discouraging and why people want to leave. And what I've been wrestling with at NIH is how to change that. It's because it's been the same way. The numbers haven't budged that much over 40 years. There may be a few more women in leadership positions, but it's really not budged a lot. So how to bring about change is, to me, a really interesting question.
Agreed. And I think you're speaking with, we're using science as this microcosm of the economy, because those numbers are the same virtually in every industry and occupation. And yet we're still having the same conversation that we were, anticipating in the 1980s, right? So, I don't mean to chuckle, but we have been on this replay for quite a long time. So, we mentioned many things in that conversation: the need for intervention, potentially changing sides, some status quo. I have to say, when I was at the business school, they kind of drilled into our heads what to ask about which problem we're solving. If we pretend to even want to be successful, right? We used to have these professors who said, forget about trying to put the best strategy together. Try to define the right question. What question are we trying to solve for? And I think I come to that as a woman, not necessarily one who's participated in academic sciences, but who's been involved in the healthcare industry and interfaced in loads of ways with very bright women, all of whom could be terrific leaders. And so I wonder, when you think of, the sciences broadly, whether it's in academic research, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in, biotech startups, in the basement of, a church in Cambridge, who cares where it is? What is the problem we really have to solve for in order to address equity? And let's start with Dr. Gigi. You want to try that one? You were kind of on it the last time.
Sure. So I'll start. I think the answers probably are multifaceted, and there need to be multifaceted solutions. What I've been doing at NIH is I helped establish what's called the NIH Equity Committee, which is sort of based on the Central Tenure Committee. And the reason I agitated for this is that I, as I've mentioned, have been here 30 years and kept being appalled by the salary differences. So I was in a position maybe 4 or 5 years ago where I could see more salaries of my colleagues. And there were 4 colleagues that were completely equivalent. The 3 men had a $20,000 higher salary than the woman who was equivalent. And so it frustrated me. Why can we not change this? And NIH had tried to make salary adjustments a couple previous times. So there had been other salary adjustments, but here we were in 2017, equivalent people, the woman had a $20,000 salary. And just to put that in perspective for people, over 5 years, that's $100,000. So I wanted to think about how can we address this particular issue. So what the NIH Equity Committee does is it asks each institute to collect data. And I think that's important. So all of the scientific directors of the institutes have to put together Excel spreadsheets for each of the individuals, the principal investigators in their institute, where they list the salaries and resources so that on a regular basis, every 2 or 3 years, the institute directors are forced to look at the numbers. And I think that's actually pretty valuable, and it is a way to prevent this slippage of data. It's a little bit like during the pandemic, if I don't get on a scale, I will not have gained any weight. If I don't get on the scale, I'm fine. But being forced to look at the numbers on a pretty regular basis, I think is very valuable for leadership. Now, I don't think that's the whole solution. It's just a start. But I think one component of trying to address inequities is to force people to look at the numbers and the data and ask why their institute is the way it is. I'll stop there.
I love it. I love it. If only Congress would force anyone getting the money from the NIH to have to disclose pay, right? Because let's be honest, we actually now have the technology to make that completely doable. I love the idea. Thank you, Dr. Storz. But let's hear from our other panelists. Dr. Jenny, what would you add on to that?
So I've sat in a position of leadership where I've seen everybody's salary for too many years to count since approximately 2001. And they repetitively get fixed, but then they slip for a number of different reasons, especially in academic medicine, where there is much more room to change the composition. And I think when you go to look at the salary problem, it's a good example of everything else in the culture. For instance, you enter in a different specialty area because you didn't enter that specialty from the very beginning. Why? Because you were dissuaded because of the culture. You then have a couple of years later on the front end because everybody's afraid you're going to have children and need that time to get to tenure, if there is tenure. Then you add the fact that there are differences in quote hours and burden, unpaid burden of work. And then you add the fact that during this midlife, when you were supposed to be so productive, right, you are being productive doing what we need to propagate the human race. So the reality is, if you just take pay as one example, it is an incredible example of how we can fix the numbers temporarily, or the numbers can look great. I've been involved in these discussions around the Athena Swan program in England. And in a uniform environment, the numbers can look great. Unfortunately, that is not usually the case. So I am convinced that after all of these years of doing this, that actually that's why the culture needs to change, and there needs to be a change in leadership, and you need a totally different view at the top so that we can actually fix these things core-wise. And I don't think universities are different in science, but I think medical schools are very different because of the spectrum of differences in salaries. And I dare say no place that I've been has equity actually been sustained in salaries.
A sobering comment, my friend.
Sorry.
No, it's reality. And, it's reality. Deb, what would you add on?
Well, the only thing I would add, it's really, I again agree with everything. And, I know at Dana-Farber, and I do have to give Dr. Ed Benz the credit for this, for putting a committee together. And he has been such a supporter of women.
Right.
I just can't even, he's not the current president. We have a female president, and it's fabulous also.
Yes.
Lori, right? But, and so the interesting thing about culture is because of this historical gap in equity, there's not trust in the institutions.
No.
So we actually instituted, every 3 years, there's an outside firm that comes in and does regression analysis, because we didn't even feel like we should be, we'll partner with them, but it should be done as an outside to ensure that. But I also believe it is still the symptom. I remember when I was also the head of HR at Harvard Medical School before coming to Dana-Farber, and this was new to me. I came from an insurance company before that, right? So I'm like, a fish out of water trying to understand this and going, okay, so 11 years in and out, you'd come in, you watch these postdocs, and I'd say, well, when do they have children? Well, we do allow for that kind of gap. And then I started to recognize some other things, and I'm going to be a little provocative here, and I don't think it's true, but we as women have to be courageous and help each other as well. And, I saw some things happening there where some of the women who had made it pretty far up in the academic environment were just mirroring the men. So, this is how it would come to me where, a postdoc in science would say, so-and-so just told me, she only took 4 days off when she had her baby. And I'm thinking, well, that's not where we want to go either. And so there's a component, and maybe COVID has helped us, and I'm dreamy, I'm too positive, but, the humanness, we've lost the humanness and the archaic old structures that don't allow for people's lives to occur. And the other thing is, it's not a problem just of science. And I'm looking at you, Linda. It's like, you know, when you take a technically capable person and you put them into leadership, that does not make a leader. So I agree, leaders have to make this important. They have to evaluate their teams on how well they're doing, not only in the data, but in the culture and the engagement and the promotions, and hold themselves accountable. And I think we're tweaking still a little bit around the edges on this. But, you know, I also agree with others where you talked about, you know, either cut the funding if you don't do it, or, but it's really is, it's not unlike in 2017 when all of, at least for those in Boston, noticed that there weren't, you know, Blacks in the pipeline anywhere in most of our hospitals. All of a sudden, we were all running around to fix it. So, you know, I just think we need to get ahead of what the world is going to demand of these institutions.
Can I follow up on something you said that I have been thinking about a lot too? And that is NIH has been trying to get more women into leadership positions, but many times it's not helped, or they have not been as supportive as you would think sometimes for other women. So that is really resulting in a conundrum. And I don't know that it's changed under COVID, to be honest, that maybe there's some lip service to it. But so I, along with other people, have been advocating for more women in leadership positions. So it's been a little bit disheartening that they haven't been as supportive of other women. I think it's a little bit, they feel insecure that they have to fit into this culture and be really a certain way. But this is an issue I have noticed here at NIH, and don't know how that can be solved.
Well, I will say that part of the reason why we host an event like this is that part of the way that can be solved is by building external networks that can support people and help women reset and bring new energy into a situation where the culture is shifting too slowly, right? That, you know, the success for women needs to be kind of an ecosystem that's bigger than the leadership chain immediately above them, unfortunately, right? So that they can continue to get skip level support, right? So that the ANHW supports this conversation and the important breakouts after, to try to recognize that these networks are critically important. And you know, the frustration that we've all had 40 years of being in this, and we're still talking about pay equity, right? You know, Deb and I have been at the table, you know, late in my career, I was asked to step in as head of HR for a global Fortune 500 company. And, you know, at that moment, we couldn't even get an employee list from around the world, let alone what everyone made, right? And when we finally did, we said to our board of directors, okay, now you guys have to keep us honest. And that was the only way. And by the way, that was well into the 2000s, right? So these issues of pay, as many of you have said, are symptoms, right? The real root is, how do we change the culture, knowingly that that's slow? How can we build around the existing culture to get some accelerators to women so that they can be successful? And Dr. Jeanette, it looked like you had one thing to add on to that before I ask the next question.
No, I was going to comment that, you know, women who were tokens, like I have to say for many years, all of us could figure out that there was only one of us at the table. That makes you very at risk. So the goal is usually to have more of a critical mass, if that includes the data on search committees and people making it to finalists, right? But that is an incredible change. That's why I firmly believe in this organization that we founded is about that, which is women have to sit at that leadership table to change the culture, because in other words, a single woman as a token is more at risk and she's more likely to have to meld into the culture. I will be frank in saying that my entire career, I was afraid to speak out about this until I retired and could found this organization. So I think it is That is what it's all about. And the rules are all different for women leaders, and how you get there, the rules are different. So I think what Deb said is right. We need to support ourselves and each other all along the way, and make sure that we don't end up with just token women leaders, because they are forced to fit in a different way.
So let's pick up on that and assume that everyone who's attending today's call is in an organization where the gender imbalance could get in the way of their desires for their career. What advice would you give them? You know, if they could do one or two things differently after this conversation, what type of advice would you give them? Go ahead, Dr. G.
Yeah, I would say, and no matter what level you are, you want friends and advocates. So when I give advice to starting tenure track people, I say, you need some friends to whom you can just let it all hang out. This sucks, it's horrible. You need some friends to whom you can turn, or all my children are crying and I have this, do whatever you need to complain about. So that's one thing. I think you also want to look to foster mentoring relationships, and more institutions are formalizing that sort of thing. But I also think women need to be proactive. I think this is true for men and women. You need to be proactive. I don't think you only want female mentors. It's good. Some of my strongest mentors, I would say, or advocates, have been males. So I don't think it has to be women. So look for both mentors and friends.
I love it. I love it. And what should we add to that for the list?
Well, can I add something to what? First of all, I'd say if you're alone, that's all wonderful too. If you have a partner, choose it well, because the support is really important. And I totally agree, and network. But I would also add to this, someone once told me this and I found it invaluable. We are all a corporation of ourselves. So we should have our own board of directors. So who are the people that will comfort and nurture you? Who are the people that will give you that tough feedback that you're not being courageous enough? You need to push forward. And the other thing I'm really learning much more about, and is being played with a little bit more in the academic environments. I think they have, the biggest problem is training the sponsors, but there's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And it also has a lot to do with what you have to do when you do have a sponsor. But a sponsor is someone who will have your back and you have their back, and they will push for your advancement or whatever you were. It's less about the mentorship around a particular issue and you know, quite frankly, you mentioned this, Linda, and I just share the story because, you know, I was doing development, I was doing succession planning. There was a turnaround in a presentation. I told the truth, which was 67% of the staff didn't believe in the leadership to take the company forward. At that point, Charlie Baker was there. He became CEO. There was a turnaround. He called me and said, could you be the acting head of HR? You can apply. I got the job. I wasn't on the track to be the head of HR. And I said to him, what the hell were you thinking putting me in that job? He said, you only cared about HR. You had great relationships with the leaders, but he said you had the courage to tell the truth to power. And that's what I needed. But I never realized he was a sponsor. I didn't have all the skills for that. And I would just add this one piece: as women, it's what I've noticed. I've noted about myself and others. You know, there's a job that people apply for. Men, and I'm going to be very, very stereotyping and making huge assumptions, but if men have done 20% of the job, I'll apply for that. I can do it. Women often want to know, well, I haven't done like some of that, but I've done, you know,
That's well known.
we got to step in. We got to step in, and other women have to help other women step in. So I could go on. I'll stop.
Yeah. So what I would add to that, so I was going to comment on the sponsorship, because that is the one thing in academic medicine that women lack. As a matter of fact, the mentorship programs have been around for years. They're in multiple levels, but this issue of sponsorship is critical and has been shown to be different between men and women. I think there's another part besides sponsorship, and that's advisors or advice. Who can you get advice that you can rely on? Again, a mentor, you might have a mentor for all sorts of different things and all sorts of different reasons, but there's a role for an advisor who actually knows the ropes in your area. So I think that's absolutely right. You need all of these things to help you through the quagmire of this ascension to leadership, if that's what your goal is. Or honestly, my goal is to make sure that we don't lose women at this time. So it's not just about getting the leadership, but it's also about preventing women from falling off during this critical time period. I think we need all the support we can find. And I totally agree with Gisela. You need that kind of emotional support. The other thing is, as you get up higher in the ladder, it is lonelier and lonelier. And then it is even harder to find that kind of support that you need, because again, the rules are different, and men have survived because of their networks for a long time. And that is something we have not had.
So let's stay with that, right? Because I think a lot of women can recognize some of the things they need to do, right? I maybe need to put my name forward for a job. I need to do a better something. I need to go give a paper, what have you. But sometimes we don't see these notions, these opportunities where we can establish a connection with somebody who could possibly be a sponsor. So Deb has given us a little glimpse of a time where she got connections to a sponsor that became really transformational for her career, right? I know her story, right? And that connection to Charlie Baker, who's now the governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a fantastic moment. But I wonder if each of you could talk about a time where you had to be courageous and reach your hand out to a sponsor or a mentor. And maybe tell us that story, because I think that that's very practical for everyone who's listening. Gisela, you have an idea?
I would say there were probably multiple times. One, I'm not known for being, and Joan will know this, for being shy about voicing my opinion. But still, it takes a toll to try and speak the truth. So often, people don't want to hear the truth, to be honest. They don't want to talk about the elephant in the room. So I think that takes a toll. That's a little bit an aside, but times where I get very sort of frustrated or angry with things, and I have turned to other people. For example, I wanted to be put up for tenure. I felt like I deserved tenure at one point. Others who I thought were equivalent were being put up for tenure. I wasn't being put up for tenure. So I turned to other people in other institutes to get a sanity check. And I know some other women have done that too. So when you feel something is inequitable, it is worth getting a sanity check and talking to other people. Like, am I completely crazy to think that this situation isn't right? So that's one situation I guess I would come up with where I was frustrated or I felt like I was being treated unfairly, and it in that case helped for me to turn to other people. I think I just get to a point where I'm just so frustrated I need to do something, and so then I act.
And so have those outreaches, to vent or to get some people to help, sanity check you, have those led to important relationships?
Yes, they have. People have been supportive in general in those situations. I choose who I turn to. I'm going to turn to people who I think will support me.
Fantastic. Thank you for that glimpse. And Dr. Jenny, I wonder, if you think about having the courage to try to pursue a new relationship for somebody who ultimately could become a sponsor. What did that look like for your experience?
It didn't,
Okay.
to be very frank. So I entered medical school in 1970. And so you can imagine that there were very few people, but I will say that somebody became my sponsor and I didn't understand it until many years later at the entry level of my career. I honestly don't believe I would be in academic medicine now if my chairman of medicine hadn't pulled me out and said, this is where you need to go. You've never been out of Seattle. You need to go to the East Coast. And that was very instrumental. But after that, there were very few people who believed that a woman who had entered at that time and who had chosen to have a family actually had a future in academic medicine. And I think that, that was not just apparent, it was verbally spoken. So I think it was a different era, a different time. It has taken us years to understand how we influence and how those influences still go on today. So I think there are institutions that do a phenomenal job at sponsorship. I happen to know the Hopkins Institution pretty well in medicine, and I think they do an amazing job. The reality is, though, there are hundreds of institutions throughout the country, and not everyone has that ability. So I believe that we do need more formal sponsorship, and we need to help individuals get that. In some cases, they don't even know that they need it. So I would say that that is a major important issue, to get women on editorial boards, into leadership, to know that they can apply for jobs, because I heard Deb say this, we know the data, right? Women believe that they're not qualified because they haven't done X, Y, and Z, and men would not even consider that. I will say, though, that I have had individuals who have forced me to look at jobs that I otherwise would not have looked at. And so in that respect, while they weren't specifically my sponsor, they actually helped me do that, think about it at least. So I think that that's a major gap. It is a major gap for us.
Thank you for that. It's so thoughtful. And Deb, do you have anything you want to add on this?
Well, the only thing I was going to add, I also think, especially in academic environments, not only is it on the person, call them a protege or mentee, whatever you call them, but it's also holding accountable what it means to be a sponsor. And even though people are well, advanced in their career who could be sponsors, they have to know how to do this.
Yes.
Because I think we assume a lot when we give someone a title. We've all experienced it. You get a title and that doesn't give you the capabilities. And, I think having those kinds of conversations, even some basic communication, I don't think we're in general, very good at it, and definitely not so much in the academic environment.
Well, and I want to also just shape this slightly, because a lot of people that I speak with are like, well, when I get to be a leader, I'll be a sponsor. And I want to remind everyone on the phone that it's irregardless of where you sit in the hierarchy, right? You can be involved with people who are your peers, people who are junior to you, and yes, reach forward with the courageous outreach to connect to others who can help you. And that we all exist in this multi-dimensional space that, and I would argue that the women today who are in their 30s or 40s, early 30s and 40s, the people who they help, that turn around and help, that are junior to them, those people are going to continue to be a productive and outstanding network for you as you go forward. So oftentimes when I talk with leaders, it's all about, well, when I get there, I'm going to be a great sponsor. The reality is you can be a sponsor in this moment, wherever you sit. And then the game is to make sure you extend your hand and be a bit vulnerable, to say, like Dr. Storz told us, I had to go get some sanity checks because it was just too overwhelming, right? I'm recognizing that we're getting close to the end, and we've said so much, right? We need to be courageous. We need to build teams of friends. We need to tell the truth to ourselves and others, and extend ourselves in ways that might be uncomfortable. So I wonder, as a final question, I wonder if you could each share with us a point in your career that maybe was a little terrifying, but nonetheless, you took a risk. and talk to us a little bit about how that played out, because I think everyone on the phone, regardless of where they are in their career, always has that option of what is this the one I should take? So can you give us a little insight on that?
Well, I'm going to, I gave you my big one when I told the truth, and I really did not expect to become the head of HR as a result of that. But and you learn different ways. So I'm going to share this because I think it's also about whole people. So ironically, I had a 20+ year as head of HR, Harvard Medical School, Harvard Pilgrim, Dana-Farber. I will be honest with all of the women on the phone that I keep a little thing on my desk. It looks like this because it's a symbol of my imposter syndrome. With that career, I still think it exists. So I lay him down and say, I know you're there, but I don't need you right now. But our teachers through our life are, I grew up where you looked up, whatever it was, a teacher, a mentor, and in this world that we're in, I'm starting to look down to learn a lot more. And I don't mean that looking down, but the generation coming up. And quite frankly, I had a son who went through a really difficult time, ended up in a therapeutic wilderness program. He's doing fine, but I had to look deep inside myself and realize, so part of my message is in your milestones, know who you are. And I realized I actually didn't like a lot of being a head of HR. I always wanted to be a psychologist. So through his journey, I stepped into, you know what? I got another chapter. And I think people, unlike many of us who followed and stayed with the same companies, I think science really does have different boundaries in some way than, I could be a head of HR anywhere, right? But you can create different chapters. And I think the world is about more of using science. It's about experimentation and take a step. You don't always have to take a leap. Take a step and try it out. So that would, sorry, I don't know why. Okay. Didn't like that, I guess.
But we did. So that's fantastic. Thank you for starting us out, Deb. And Dr. Jenny, you want to go next?
Sure. I think that there are risks that you take virtually all the time as you try to figure out how to manage your career. And I think I've had several, probably one of the most impactful, and I won't talk about my retirement because that was very painful to think about, actually, which is if you're going to do something, there are only so many years left, you better think about this. But I will actually say mid-career, I find the most challenging. In the middle of my career, I had a serious sexual harassment issue. And I understood that there was really nowhere to turn after I raised it. And I was so unhappy, I almost left academics because I thought, if this is the way life is going to be, how is it that I can go on in this system? And that's probably why this movie that you're going to give to everybody was so impactful for me. And I remember very clearly going through a whole time where I said, well, if I leave, or if I take it up higher, I won't have a career. And if I leave because I can't manage, I also will have given up everything that I cared about in my career. So it was an enormous year that I went through this, trying to think about how do I step back, how do I recoup, and how do I move forward in a way that I can manage myself. And I will be honest in saying that my career initially had a very large impact because I have 2 of my 4 kids were serious cardiac children. And I remember very clearly being told, you should just quit because there's no way you're going to make it. And I tell those stories because you really have to know yourself and what you think is important to you and how you want to pursue that and be able to get through some of the issues that exist still in this world. And it does take bravery in many respects. I don't think I necessarily have it. Maybe looking back, I would have made different decisions, but I think that those things are going to happen to you. And they may happen in a way that is a big thing or a little thing, or it might be all the microaggressions that wear you down. And then you do have to step back and say, what is it that's really important to me? And what do I give up if I take this direction or that direction? So after 40 years in a career, you can look back and see those decision points.
Thank you so much for trusting us and sharing us with that story, Dr. Jeanette. It's so important. And Dr. Storz.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think throughout what's been most important for me is persistence. I think that's a message that comes through in the movie too, that even when I tried to bring about change, the first time I asked about changing something, I didn't get a response. A year later, I didn't get a response. And so just being persistent, I think has been the most important skill I have had in this business. I think it's always useful to end on a little bit of a positive note. I feel very privileged to have had a career in science. There's many wonderful people in science, and there's many wonderful people from all around the world, and one can get a lot of sort of satisfaction out of the career. So even though things haven't changed as much as I would have liked, I still feel like it's been a privilege.
And what a lovely place to end, right? Yes, we have gender inequities, not just in the sciences, but systemically in our culture. But within that, if we are courageous enough to bring who we are to what we do, I think that the rewards are there in spades. So thank you all for sharing your beautiful stories with us and inspiring us to pursue the things that are in our hearts. So we really thank you all. Let me just coordinate on where we're at. We are going to transition now into our breakout groups. Each of these fabulous speakers will be partnered with another ANHW board member to host these breakout discussions. We will be dismissing you from the breakout session. So this will be the end of our group session. We're thrilled that you've all joined us. As many of the speakers have reminded you, and I said up front, everyone who's here today and anyone who's registered will have an email from us immediately after the program inviting you to a wonderful documentary, Picture a Scientist, that can help continue this really outstanding conversation. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Lisa and ask what we need to do next.
Thank you everybody for attending our event today. For some reason, I lost host capabilities a few moments ago, so the breakout rooms that I built are gone. I need 2 minutes to put those back together, and then I'll be able to launch those. So thank you for your patience.
We can easily fill that out, but I wonder if somebody would like to ask the group if there's any question that you'd like to put in the chat. You're more than welcome to. But I wonder, because I can go, I always have another question there. So ladies, if we did one thing, if we could do one thing magically in the next decade to fix gender inequities, what would we do? Dr. Storz, I love the smile, so I'm going to start with you.
I don't think there's one thing we can do. Sorry. I just don't think there's one. So, I'm actually going to riff off that. I think it needs to be multiple organizations. So there's the Athena Society. There's the Rosalind Franklin Society. There are different organizations within the American Society for Microbiology or whatever organization. I think all these different people have to work together and also partner with groups very interested in increasing diversity. So I think this needs to be multifaceted with multiple groups doing similar work. I've sometimes wondered, they're doing the same work we're trying to do, but I think that's the only way to do it. Multiple groups have to do the same kind of work.
I love this collaboration theme across organizations. It's really very powerful. Someone else, Dr. Jenny, do you have something to add?
Sure, I totally agree. And I would comment that science and medicine is an incredibly wonderful profession and life. And in the next decade, I think that the time is ripe to really force leadership to look through an equity lens. So to change the way we think about things, use evidence to focus on the things that matter, not the generic numbers. So I think when you start to look at leadership at institutions with this different lens, that we have a better chance of actually focusing on changing the culture. Now, of course, I believe that we need to get to 30 to 40% of women in leadership, and that by itself will enormously change the balance and how we work and actually be better for our patients and innovation. But hopefully.
Perfect. And Deb, last word.
So the only thing I would add to this, and hopefully, this is understood, but, it has to be systemic. And hopefully I can say this, and I hope the academic, scientific, and clinical worlds will lose a little bit of the arrogance to learn from what's happening in many other industries at 100 miles an hour. I get it's very different and does not totally apply, but the whole world is shifting from, this archaic, hierarchical, like, how do you do that? Science doesn't get done that way anymore. At least that's what I'm told, collaboration across the world, across the globe. So it really is doing what science does best, but applying it. And the numbers have to be there, but the cultures and values and the accountability also has to be there.
Perfect. I love trying to.
Could I ask you a question? Linda, could I ask Deb a follow-up question?
For sure.
So I'm curious, and you don't have to answer this if it's too difficult for you, but having Lori Glimsher as the head of Dana-Farber, and I know she's a strong supporter of women, do you think that that's now having an impact at Dana-Farber?
I loved working with Lori, and absolutely an incredible advocate. Talks about it all the time. And so hopefully she's not listening in, but Lori is a scientist at her core.
Right.
So some of the organizational pieces of infrastructure that need to be focused on, there are times it can be very, when you think about at least at Dana-Farber, the three legs of the stool, research, clinical, and administration, sometimes some of those processes around the faculty, they weren't built into the system and weren't invested in. But Lori, absolutely, and Dana-Farber, having her as I'm talking about persistent and courage, but she also has a history of what it was like to grow up as a scientist in her world, and her stories. I love, Jeanette, you shared that story, because there are many that I've heard in my life in HR and seen, and they're just, it makes me so sad. But absolutely, yes, Lori has made a huge difference. And I will say, and it looks like you know him, Jeanette, but Dr. Ed Benz,
Yes.
who was before Lori, started the infrastructure, in a very challenging time where all of this was becoming clear, where the inequities, they're just not paying attention.
Yeah.
So it really is unconscious in some ways. But once it becomes conscious, there's no excuses. So she has taken it to the next level.
So
Thank you for asking.
Joan gave us a wonderful pivot, which tells me it is time to bring our breakout rooms, because people want to ask questions. So Lisa
Great.
Khan, what can we do next?
I'm going to open the rooms. You all join them. I'll be here in the main room in case you get disconnected, so I can put you back in your room as needed.
Again, thank
Hi, AC. Oh, sorry, can you unmute? Sorry, there you go. Now I'll be able to hear you.
Okay, nice to see you. As I was saying, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to enter the breakout rooms. And it's been a fascinating program. Very, very well done. I'm impressed.
Yeah, Linda, Cortana, they're a great team. Thank you for sending the PBS link. I literally finished watching the documentary. I think I have 5 minutes left, 10 minutes before we all met at 4:15. And I cannot believe the things that women have had to endure in the sciences to get to the sub-equitable position that we're in now.
Well, I know our Committee for the Equality of Women interacted a great deal with Nancy Hopkins at MIT. And so we date back in history and trying to address this, and we're still actively pursuing it. But I think these speakers are very much on target.
Tremendous. And we'll have to get the video up online as soon as possible too.
Oh, it's been delightful.
Yes.
All right, you take care, my dear, and we'll be in touch. I'm impressed with the progress that you and Jess are making with our nominating committee. I mean, we're off and running and a done fact.
Thank you. Happy to work with you and draw on your historical knowledge. And yeah, let's see if anybody will run.
I hope so.
Yes.
All right.
Take care.
You enjoy. We'll be in touch.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.